Greetings everyone and welcome back. This is day 3 of Wings Up Week. I'm Russ Still and this series is brought to you by Gold Seal and Safe. Now this stay-at-home stuff is starting to really sink in right about now, and it's easy to get bored and discouraged, and I understand that. That's why we put together this week-long series of live shows to boost your spirits, keep your eye on aviation. We may not be flying quite as much right now, but let's all stay in the game. There is an end to this, and generally aviation will return and get us back off the ground. We did have a really good show yesterday about flight simulators. Our guests, Chris Palmer, Paul Duty, Rod Machado, and Mr. Flight Chops himself did a fantastic job identifying things that we can do with off-the-shelf flight sim software to help stay motivated. Now, I'm sure they're great for keeping your skills up, but I'm waiting to hear from the first of you to tackle that real-time transatlantic flight. And speaking of long hauls, David St. George is co-hosting today and is ready to relay the story of his recent coast-to-coast VFR flight in an RV-12. And it's pretty exciting, actually. After that, Rod Machado will do the rejoin, followed by the world's most savvy flight instructor, Greg Brown. This is going to be fun. So, Dave, greetings, and how are things in Ithaca today?
Real good. We actually got some sunshine up here. And Russ, I just want to really compliment you on the shows you've been putting on. It really has created some excitement. I watched it live yesterday and I caught the YouTube replay, and just amazing. The guests, Chris Palmer up there in Alaska, even, what a crew. And today, Rod Machado and Greg Brown, you couldn't do any better. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And thanks to Ethan and Will behind the scenes.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of fun. We enjoy doing these, but I've got to admit, putting together 5 of them in a row pushed us, but it's always, we push the envelope out and I think we're going to be okay there. So the weather today is about, here in Atlanta, it's about 68 degrees outside and sunny, pretty much a perfect day. So after this, I may actually go pull the 182 out of the hangar and go do some aviating.
Yeah, I think I'm going to grab the Champ and do the same thing.
Yeah,
great day for it.
That's a good way to keep our head. That's a good way to keep our heads in the game. Well, yeah, the ones we had earlier, the Tuesday and Wednesday versions of the Wings Up Week broadcast are out there on YouTube. Just search for Gold Seal Flight Training in YouTube, and you will find you will find those videos. You got a stalker on the set there, Dave?
We've been photobombed by one of the best, yeah.
Yeah, we were doing a broadcast, I think it was year before last at Sun and Fun, right in the middle of a broadcast, Paul Bertorelli jumped in and stuck his head right in there over the shoulder, so that's always good for a laugh, and we're glad to have these kind of things. Yes, he will. Okay, well, today, one of the things I'm really looking forward to hearing is your story about this flight this ferry flight you took from, it was Oregon and back to New York. So let's dig in and share the adventure.
Sure thing. Well, just to give you a little background, I've been flying now 50 years, and obviously everyone starts out the same way, VFR pilot, then you get, at some point your IFR, and for me that was 700 hours into the game. But once you're instrument rated, you tend to really use that as your resource, and always the answer is to climb when you have a situation with weather and terrain. But I volunteered to do this ferry flight with a friend, bringing his brand new RV from the factory in Oregon all the way back to Ithaca. And as it evolved, it was supposed to be in November, and things got pushed back because the RV-12 has just been like a home run. AOPA has purchased one, and EAA has purchased 3 for their sport academy. So they really have a lot of production going there in Oregon. So if you could put up that first slide, we'll just take a look at what this all looked like. For me now as a jet charter pilot, getting back into a little plane and thinking about a transcontinental flight in a machine that's totally VFR was a little bit intimidating. And especially that part, if you look on the left there, getting through the mountains, and we knew that we had limited time, we had limited capability in terms of what we could do. So analyzing it, as every good pilot does, we'll look at the PAVE, obviously a brand new plane, but that can be a problem too. So Joe Brand, who's the owner of the plane, went out a couple days early and got some training in the plane with the factory. He had already done a flight review with another facility, so he was familiar with the plane. But it has a beautiful Garmin glass panel, about the best, avionics you could ask for. And sure enough, there were a few little glitches to work out. So if anyone's, after this shutdown goes away and we're flying again, there may be some CFIs doing ferry flights. You want to always make sure that machine, before you hop in it and head for the mountains, is fully checked out and ready to go. But anyway, the two of us got in there and we had done some training, and then it just turned out to be a perfect day for the first launch going out of Oregon. And if you put up slide 3 there, as you enter into the mountains and go up the gorge, that was sort of the wake-up call for me, because here I'd been IFR, I got about 4,000 hours in the clouds. I had not been VFR, hard VFR, in a lot of years. And the challenge of looking at hills like that and saying, we're going to motor our way all the way to Ithaca, New York, 2,200 miles further along through the hills, was a little bit daunting. And but the plan was initially in November going north through Missoula, and then as we got into winter, the plan was going south through California. And as it evolved, the best time, and talking with the pilots there at the factory how to get east, what we decided was to go through the valley into Boise, Nampa, that way, north of Salt Lake and into Wyoming. So the first day was about a 6-hour, I think I got on the log here, 6 hours in the saddle. We stopped at Nampa and we got lunch. And of course, that's where they used to make the Kit Foxes. And there's a beautiful restaurant right on the field. And if you play slide 5 there, take a look at that. One before that, actually, if you would, 5. Yeah, there we go. You can see that's sort of my Garmin selfie, but you can see the track through the hills there kind of winding straight around Mount Hood and then hooking to the south to get, beyond those big red hills. But you can also see how functional this panel is. I mean, it has all of the terrain mapping, it has synthetic vision, it has the engine gauges, and it's got a dual set of these. Now, to be clear, the RV-12 is a light sport aircraft, so that has certain limitations, but when people think of light sport, they often think of the pilot limitations. So a light sport pilot can't fly in less than 3 miles. They can only fly during the day. Excuse me, they have to fly within sight of the ground. So there's a lot of limitations there, but when you are a private pilot or better, and you're rated medical flight review, you don't have those limitations. The only limitations apply to the actual aircraft. So you can fly with standard limitations that a private pilot would look at. So if we look at slide 6, this is the second half of the first day. That's just passing Salt Lake and going north of a lake they call Bear Lake. And I wasn't even, flatlander, I hadn't been out there. But I'll tell you, all of this terrain, when you look at it in a little small 100 horsepower aircraft, is pretty intimidating. But anyway, I had prepared a bit. We knew the shutdown was coming. COVID was already starting to press on us, and I went to Portland, and I was pretty much the only guy in the plane, so we knew time was pressing. So when you start to analyze risk and you say, okay, pilot well qualified, airplane, PAVE, airplane brand new, not a lot of time in it. Environment, pretty challenging. The weather was good, however, for this part of it. And then the external pressure was we could feel the clock ticking, but we had decided ahead of time, if we had to leave it somewhere and fly safely back on the airlines, that's what we would do. But I did call ahead to Rawlins, Montana, earlier in the week. It looked like where we'd be stopping. And then I called the day before, and the next slide there, number 7, if you guys would play it, is this guy they call Famous Bob in Rawlins. We pull in after 7 hours in the saddle in this little plane, and here's Bob on the ramp, marshaling us in. Here's a hangar for us. And he was just tickled to have some company because there wasn't much happening in Rawlins, Montana. So if you put that next slide up there, guys, that'll show a little bit about what kind of terrain we're looking at here. This is a lot of nothing out here. And as you pass through, you know, you'll occasionally see a rail line, maybe a river, but just miles and miles of not much. So this was our most challenging leg. Rawlins, we got in there, and in the morning we woke up. It was kind of low, and we started off going eastbound, and we only got about, I think that's about 170 miles into Scottsbluff, Nebraska. But if you drop that next slide in there, you'll see why that was important. In Wyoming, up there on the high plateau, there's very little terrain clearance if you're at 9,000 feet. And this is, by the way, the ForeFlight app, which if you haven't used the profile view, you can see how highly effective this is to analyze your risk. And for this leg, we really did have to get down and kind of follow the railroads through about that VOR. And then the terrain dropped off nicely as we got into Scottsbluff. But as we got there, I mean, there was absolutely nothing that was going to allow us to get further because the snow was moving in, and we just pretty much put it down on the ground there. So is that all looking like pretty good risk management so far, Russ?
Looks like you had a lot to deal with, but you handled it swimmingly.
So far, so good, right? And I'm very aware
So
I have
far.
3 of the most professional flight instructors in the world, you know, analyzing this as I'm laying it out. This is not like a standard Sun and Fun forum. I have my mentors taking notes and grading this flight. Anyway, going back to number 9 there, I do want to point out, you know, that even though we were close to terrain, on that slide, you can see the little bit we were within 1,000 feet of the ground. 1 mile clear of clouds. We're in class Gulf airspace, and synthetic vision. We had decided ahead of time the minimum we were going to pretty much accept was 700 feet and 3 miles, and that got us just barely into Scottsbluff. And as you cross that divide, you can see it drops off, and suddenly you have a lot more AGL to work with. So Super 8 motel, wonderful. You know, I always say I never stay in a hotel that has a number, but there we were staying. And slide 11 shows what happened next. We woke up in the morning and we had about 8 inches of snow out in the parking lot on the rental car. And this doesn't work too well with light sport hard VFR flying. So slide 12 was later that day as we were trying to get out of there. We exercised every option that we could imagine. First, we went, as you can see, north, and we were at about 1,000 feet, and we got into the snow. We did it in a 180, came back. Same leg, we took the route to the southeast, and that's the IFR, I follow railroads. That's the North Platte River. And we started to follow that south. And I could think about Greg Brown and his flying in the west. You know, this is very challenging terrain to be in because there's a lot of big rocks. But that didn't work either, and we had to turn around. And you could see that little squiggle in the center of the screen. That's where we circled up through a hole because it was starting to open up from, but nothing on the ground level was working. Everything was to the ground. So what I did was exercise an option you can see on the VOR there that we have a remote frequency, 122.6. And if our savvy instructors know what that means, you can call flight service over the VOR. So as Joe was flying the plane back into Scottsbluff, I got on the flight service remote frequency and started talking to him about how did the weather look to the northeast. And sure enough, we got a PIREP up in Minnesota within our fuel range that said, okay, it was starting to open up and we had scattered conditions. And if you look back on the very first slide, if you can grab that, Will, and put it up there, you'll see a very different kind of leg there. You see where it goes from BFF in the center, a very straight leg up to KM, it's Jackson there, MNO. That was completely on top. Now, again, this is something that a sport pilot is not allowed to do. but a sport plane is certified for. So at 9,500 straight shot, autopilot on over the clouds by probably 2,000 feet, and we escaped Nebraska. And I thought we never would get out of there. I had already looked at the airline connections to SkyWest and to Denver and was ready to go home. And Joe was like, I want my plane in Ithaca. So he's like, please don't head home. Anyway, slide 13 there, if you can grab it, shows what it looks like as you're trying to work your way under some clouds and snow. This is the North Platte River. There's the railroad and the interstate. And the one fortunate thing out west is you don't have a lot of towers, but you do have, enough terrain that you really can't get too low, even with synthetic vision. So we took one selfie. I think it's slide 15 there, the two of us, happy to be flying. I don't know exactly where this was, but we weren't on top of the clouds. The trip into Minnesota was like 3 hours entirely, just flat, solid overcast. And that's where you really get a little nervous if you're in a light sport plane, because you don't have the IFR capability. So we kept checking ahead, and sure enough, the holes were opening up. We got into Jackson, we got some fuel, and then we made it all the way to Kankakee that day. So that was like almost 8 hours in the saddle trying to fly. And at that point, the COVID thing was starting to shut down restaurants, so we couldn't get food. We had to get some takeout, and we could feel the clock ticking as that pressed on. So let's see, how far are we? We're about halfway across. I think there's a slide of the Mississippi 16, which is always, if you're doing a transcontinental, a big sort of watershed moment. Crossing the Mississippi up there was good. And then 17, I think, is the plane on the ground in Kankakee. At that point, it was pretty much a done deal. There's the Mississippi as we're south of Chicago coming down, and there's the little light sport. And what a beautiful plane. I can't say enough about that machine. I ran a flight school for 25 years, and we had a light sport, which I got one of the first ones I could find. And you look at the various parts of it and think about whether it's going to work or not. But I love to have a stick to operate rather than a yoke. The second thing, if you could put that slide back up there, one of you guys, if you look at the gear, it's a very solid spring gear, and they redid the nose gear, so it's very solid. And I could see why EAA picked up 3 of these for their Sport Academy. It's just a great machine. And fuel burn, 3.7, 3.9 gallons per hour, and you're doing about 120. So what an amazing machine. Joe previously had owned an A36 Bonanza, that's doing 12, 14 gallons per hour. And this little machine, what a great little Hummer. It's fuel injected, and it has a service ceiling up around 15, I think it is. So quite a machine. So that's most of it. You got questions there, Russ? Am I in trouble yet?
No, not at all. And it's amazing to hear about the kind of performance they're getting out of some of these light sport airplanes. I mean, a service ceiling of 15,000 feet and less than 4 gallons an hour, and you proved that you can go through some of the most inclement weather VFR that can be offered up to you. So keeping our VFR skills sharp are positively a good thing to do, aren't they?
Well, and I wanted to mention something about that. Thank you for throwing that in there. It's very easy as a flight instructor, or then now as a charter pilot, to lose the VFR skills. And many people in training go into the airlines, never really dig in and develop their VFR skills. It's a very different skill set, and it's something that we can lose if we don't practice regularly. But a trip like that will tune you up. So, when this breaks, I hope everyone exercises the privilege. Yeah, and I'm sure we will. Thanks for that story, Dave. I have been waiting since we came up with the idea of telling this story. I've been waiting to hear it. All I've seen was just a few pictures. So thanks very much for doing that. What do you think, Dave? You want to give away a T-shirt and a cap now? We could do it. Okay. All right. Well, here's what we're going to do. For all you out there watching us today, and thank you for being here,
if you're either on Facebook in the comment section, or on YouTube in the comment section, or if you're on onlinegroundschool.com/live right here in the chat box. And by the way, if you're having some issues with the comments or the chat box in one of these three venues, go to one of the other ones, because that's how you're going to answer this question. So get ready to type in an answer. I'm going to show you a picture in just a moment. This was taken at Oshkosh a couple of years ago. And let's go ahead and put that picture up there and see who we have. Now, I'm going to ask you a question about this picture. The first one to type in the correct answer is going to win a Gold Seal t-shirt, as well as a cap from Safe. All right, so there we are in front of our DC3. That's Nate Tennant, one of our instructors. He is on the left. The first person to type the name of that gentleman, you may not be able to recognize him with the shades on, but the guy on the right in the black t-shirt, what's his name? Spelling doesn't matter, just give it your best shot. We're going to be looking for that. I'm not going to see the answers come across, so I'm not going to be doing the picking, but the guys in the back, we're actually in the remote virtual back, are watching all three of the comment boxes, chat boxes, and they're going to pick out the first person to do that. And in a moment, somebody will give me the answer. And we will give away a cool t-shirt. You have your choice of a Wings logo on the back, or probably the cooler one of the two, watch for low-flying aircraft. These have been really popular. Okay, so in just a minute, I see names coming across. Oh, okay, we do have a winner. Gregory got it. Steve Oconevo. That's our buddy Steve Oconevo with Nate at the DC3 at Oshkosh. So way to go, Gregory. Now here's what you're going to do to win your wonderful prizes. I want you to write down this email address. I want you to send an email to prize, P-R-I-Z-E, prize@onlinegroundschool.com. Send us to us. Tell us that you won the Steve Oconevo t-shirt and cap. Give us your size, your snail mail address, and we will send one of these things on your way. So thanks, Gregory. This was fun. We're going to try to give away another one here in a little bit. Next, we've got Dave. We've got Rod going to join us. He's going to join the panel, and we're going to talk about, possibly what we may expect as pilots after this quarantine period goes down. So, Rod, are you queued up and ready to join the room? There you are.
I'm ready.
Afternoon.
I am ready.
Afternoon, sir.
Afternoon, folks. Afternoon. And Dave,
Okay.
when I saw that guy walk behind you, I thought I was witnessing a home invasion robbery. So at least we'd have a lot of evidence as that guy carried your engine out. You're very cautious bringing your engine at night before you go in. I like how that works. You know, it's interesting. I really enjoyed that discussion about the cross-country flight and being flying for 50 years for you, and thousands of hours flying jet aircraft, and suddenly you're popped inside a tiny little airplane flying VFR with an entirely different reg set, so to speak, than what you're normally used to. And I find that interesting. My secret, of course, probably never told you this, for being able to fly VFR cross country successfully, is to have a handy pop-up dispenser with ASRS forms in it right in the airplane. And I just send them in preemptively every time I land. So that's just my little secret. No, I'm just kidding. That's not true. What is true? Not true. So here's, what's really interesting about that, and this is what I find fascinating, is what is the difference in a question I ask in seminars? What's the difference between IFR flying and VFR flying? And specifically, I ask it with this reference. Which one requires the greatest amount of creativity? And I wait for an answer, and many people will say IFR flying, because you have to plan and know how to set the radios up. And no. If you believe that, that's like believing that pre-ignition is the ability to see sparks from the future. I don't see it that way. What I see is VFR flying requires the greatest amount of creativity, because you have to make up everything pretty much as you go along. You don't have a specific route you fly. You have to make up the route. You have an altitude you fly, you have to make up the route or the altitude. You don't have people doing weather for you. You have to figure out the weather yourself. There's so many little things that require a tremendous amount of creativity. Now, antithetically, IFR flying is not so much being creative, and I don't mean that in any dismissive way. That's not my point here. It's not a matter of being creative when you fly IFR. It's your ability to follow the regulations. It's the ability to follow the rules that were laid forth that allow you to fly IFR safely. And the rules are very strict. And if you really want to see what really strict rules are, look at Part 121, for example, the air carrier regulations. And with air carrier regulations, folks, these were not written by party planners, all right? That's very important. Part 121 is extremely strict. And in fact, there's even one regulation in there. I'll take a little liberty with this. It says, and I'm not making this up. No, the making up stuff I do at the end of the program. What this regulation says is the takeoff distance shall not exceed the length of the runway. Oh, that is a good rule. General aviation needs rules like that. But when we fly VFR, we make it up ourselves. And so it requires a tremendous amount of creativity to do that. And you said when you got in this airplane, after all that IFR flying and high performance jet aircraft, all of a sudden you have to fly this little airplane across country. And I've done this many times, and I know exactly what you're saying. You have to then think, what do I do next? Where am I going to go? I don't have people telling me what to do. And that's all part of the great fun. And I think the challenge with flying VFR. And to your point, and then I'll let you comment on, I'd like to hear your comment on this. To your point, you flew that route not only strategically, but you flew it tactically. And that was very interesting, showing flight, I think it was out of Rollins, flying north, then flying south, and then flying eventually east, getting the direction that you eventually wanted to head, kind of testing out where the weather was penetrable, where you couldn't go. That was very, very smart. I mean, on the micro scale, if you really wanted to ramp this down, you could even say that you flew from one airport to the next, to the next, to the next, and at a specific point where you could no longer proceed in the direction of your destination of choice, you'd land because the weather was bad or whatever phenomena happened to be present. So that sort of tactical thinking is extremely important when it comes to flying VFR, when you're flying in inclement conditions. What do you think about that? This idea of VFR versus IFR, flying creativity and the difference between the two?
Yeah, I would say, it's exactly accurate, which is you have so much more freedom VFR, where you're going, which altitude, and there's so much more burden upon the pilot to make a good choice. And as you saw going out of Scottsbluff there, 2 180s. 180s are the hardest thing for a pilot to do. And I think I told you this before, Newton's fourth law, which is a pilot in motion tends to stay in motion. The hardest thing is to turn that plane around and head back to your starting point and, reboot. And so we did it going north, we did it going southeast, and finally, we were able to get up on top. But you're exactly right. IFR, you keep the plane on the black line, and it's pretty much an engineered operation with very little. Airspace goes away, you're in the weather, but largely you're managing risks, a different set of risks. So thank you for that. It is a challenge. And, I had a greater respect for all the pilots that do it on a daily basis. VFR is a tough one.
Yeah, very much.
I agree with what Rod made an interesting comment about it being VFR being more creative, and I never really thought about it that way, but it's exactly right. You have different kinds of options, and they're more up to you. IFR is really more of a practice of playing nicely within the system. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think exactly right. And I've had IFR pilots who then go out VFR, and they've flown for years in the system, and airspace disappears, and they're maybe over a TRSA, and they're like suddenly thinking, oh, geez, am I in a class Charlie? What is this airspace? And they've lost that VFR skill. So obviously it's something that every pilot should keep sharp and develop. And I was thinking, I was talking to Rod on the phone earlier when we were discussing what we were going to talk about. And I'm thinking a lot of these CFIs that we've created in the last 2 years with the airline boom have become very good IFR pilots because they're training for the airlines. And now suddenly this whole system is backing up. I was just on the phone with two of my students to see how it's going. And, there are furloughs starting to happen. Many of these CFIs will be teaching VFR pilots. I hope their skills are up to the game.
Well, that's very,
and that's a good conversation topic that we should talk about. What kind of future. We don't want to get into any. We want to keep it light and happy, but let's face some facts. What's it going to do to the flight instruction and the flight training community over the next few months after this pathological issue is behind us? Rod?
Yes, I haven't seen the Four Horsemen show up yet, so I'm still hopeful for being able to overcome this virus problem. But the thing that's interesting about flight instructors, and having known many of them over the years, and of course they are my friends and my family, and I find it fascinating that when you take the average flight instructor probably, and again, I don't say this in any dismissive way, I'm just trying to state what I think might be the facts here, probably has not gone more than 300 miles away from his primary airport or her primary airport during their entire flight training career. Typically, you don't have to. You send the student out on the cross-country flight, and maybe you make a couple of those long commercial flights, or not commercial, but IFR flights with your student for the cross-country requirement, and that's fine. But what I discovered many years ago with a recommendation for gaining confidence as a private pilot, it's probably one of the, I think, biggest kept secrets. But it is so powerful that once you do it, a student comes back transformed. And I say student, a private pilot, a commercial pilot, somebody that has already acquired the private pilot certificate. And that is to take a cross-country flight just like Dave took. And maybe not necessarily directly over the mountains in that direction, although there are many safe ways, quite a few safe ways actually, to cross the Rockies, and you can go north, you can go south, down near Albuquerque, and you can do it in a Cessna 150 and do it safely. So, or even RV-12 easily in RV-12. If you can do it in a Cessna 150 Land-O-Matic, you can probably do it in a standing airplane, as long as you have a month or two to spare to get to your destination. I mean, this is not a speed demon. Let's be frank about that. So, in fact, the Cessna 150, if I have to tell the truth, it really only has 2 throttle settings. No, really. Fly, no fly. Fly, no fly. And sometimes it's no fly, no fly. So that's the way it goes. But take a cross-country flight, and if you don't want to do it to the extent that Dave did, and again, Dave is already been clearly a 50-year, highly experienced pilot, but I'm saying take a cross-country flight, go 300, 400, 500 miles. And if you really have the chops, take it across country all the way to the other coast. If you're starting on the West Coast, it's tremendously exciting, and it'll build confidence. And then you'll be able to sound like an airline pilot with the confidence level that they have. Except many years ago at John Wayne Airport, where I'm sitting on the runway in the run-up area, and I hear United Airlines came out when they first started flying out of John Wayne. It was Orange County then. 7 o'clock in the morning, 727 pulls up on the threshold, and you hear this. John Wayne Tower. This is United Airlines' #1 airline, #1 crew, #1 on the runway, #1 for takeoff. Amazing, that voice, the resonance, incredible. And all of a sudden the tower says, Roger United, you're on ground control. Contact the tower 126.8. And so sometimes it doesn't matter how confident you are. But would you agree with that, Dave? And Russ, cross-country flights as a confidence?
I think you're 100% there. And, the other thing that's important is like my skills, though I had that years ago. I mean, I've been looking down at the Rockies. Now I'm flying through the Rockies. It's a very different game. You really have to manage your recent experience to be safe. And, I tell you, as I passed Mount Hood there, it was like, am I ready for this? It's self-examination. So. But boy, I mean, the freedom, and looking back at it now, a week, 2 weeks, it seems like a year ago because everything's changed. I just hope I'm able to do it again at some point. You look at these things and say, hope that wasn't the last time. These are strange times right now. So.
Yes, they are. And Those of us who live over on the East Coast who haven't been out over the high desert or over the mountains out there, that's a completely different kind of flying. I brought a 177 from Los Angeles back to Atlanta a few years ago, and two guys in there. And in fact, they had loaded up all their gear and stuff. And when we started to take off, I said, "Guys, we're overloaded. We're gonna land at Sedona. You know, we got to get rid of some of this stuff." So they were taking their blue jeans and their shoes and throwing them in the trash and trying to ship them home. So these are kind of things that people like us on the East Coast are not confronted with, and we're not prepared for. But I agree, yeah, a cross-country flight, literally across the continent, is a worthwhile thing. When you get back flying, I'd suggest that's a good one for everyone. Let's talk some more about what we might expect in the flight training and flight instructor world, you know, in the coming weeks, months, and through the year. Dave, you want to hit it off?
Well, yeah, I think all of the things we're seeing, you know, I've been telling people for the last couple of years, this is the best time there has ever been for pilots. You know, the hiring is crazy. You can't find a pilot. The, you know, youngsters are in G4s, you know, at 22, 26. And, you know, now suddenly the door slam closed and the whole thing's backing up. And I'm seeing on the forums on Facebook that people are, you know, I can't pay off my loans. I thought I'd be working as a CFI. I'm looking for the airline, you know, big bonus payment. Obviously, that whole thing just collapsed, and I really don't know where we're going to go. It really depends how the airlines do, I think.
Rod, you got any comments on that? What we might expect, maybe either from a flight instructor standpoint as well as from a student standpoint? I'm guessing students will have plenty of flight instructors to choose from. It may be the other side, that there's a glut of flight instructors and not enough airline jobs to put them back where they would prefer to be in many cases.
That's very
kind of
true,
something that makes
Russ,
me grind my teeth.
Well, no, that make a very good point there, Russ and Dave. And I think the most important thing is reinforces the point that when you go out looking for a flight instructor, you have to be extremely careful that you pick somebody that's best suited to you and somebody that's going to stay around. And, you know, you need somebody that you can count on for training. So just be very discerning about the flight instructor you elect to fly with. And I'm an eternal optimist when it comes to aviation. I've only seen two authentic pilot shortages in my life. One was right at the just before 9/11, and the other one was this time. And we were just it was like taking a baseball bat to the oleo strut in 9/11, and we just experienced the same thing right now. But you know, I'm hopeful. Aviation is a fundamental part of our society and our culture, and it will come back. When? I don't know, but that doesn't mean that you don't prepare. And that doesn't mean that you don't, you know, keep it in the forefront of your dreams and your ambitions, and it'll come back. It's just a matter of time, and I do believe that.
Exactly so. We just have to keep our mind in the game, be positive, hope for the best, and be ready to move whenever things start opening up again. Well, on a more positive note, we did, I know Greg Brown was out on his Facebook group and took a poll about what people would like to learn about photography, specifically aerial photography. So he is quite talented and quite good at that. And if you've ever seen some of his photography, it is absolutely amazing. But Greg's going to join us here just a few minutes, and he's going to discuss some of the tricks about picking shots, picking angles, and even get into some correction issues using Lightroom, which is a piece of software. Greg is obviously the world's most savvy flight instructor. We're glad to have him here. So we've got a special introduction for him. Let's take a look.
It's always been compelling for me. I've been flying since 1972. I learned to fly when I was in college. Last November was my 40th year as a pilot. Very often people don't understand why people like me would want to fly in a small airplane. One of the biggest thrills is the idea that I can take someone for a half-hour or a 1-hour ride. They will remember for the rest of their lives.
Clear prop.
People learn to fly for a variety of reasons. For me, it's the view out the window that has always been what compels me to fly, the bird's eye view of the world from above.
This is just a wonderful view.
So like every other pilot, after I take off, I'm flying the airplane using conventional controls. And then as I'm flying along, I might spot something that is an instantaneous opportunity for a great photo. So I flip on the autopilot, grab my camera, or I'll just fly with my feet using the rudder to control the plane while I shoot. One of the benefits of the way I shoot, which is spontaneous compared to those photographers who take off on a mission to shoot a certain thing, is that I sometimes discover things from the air
This is a pretty special scenery.
that only last an instant, that other people would never see.
This has allowed him to share the beauty from above and get everybody else involved in these pictures.
I love the interaction between weather and the ground. When weather adds an element of the landscape that makes it special, makes it a one-time experience. I love geometry. I love patterns. And so that's another thing I'm always looking for, is some surprising pattern on the ground.
He focuses on one unique idea or thought and then puts it into the picture, and when it's all perfectly choreographed, a picture comes out and it's beautiful and it's breathtaking.
This is what I live for.
Given how much flying and photography both are part of my fiber and soul, I would hope that I'll be in that airplane right up to the last moment.
Greg, it's great to have you here. You know, we talk a lot on the phone and through emails and stuff, but I have to tell you, you do the most amazing aviation photography. You've really got an eye for it. So thanks for hopping in today and sharing some of that.
Thank you, Russ. Good to be here.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people may know you more as an author because you've written a lot of books. We've got you've Savvy Flight Instructor. The Turbine Pilot's Flight Manual, I know, has been one of your more popular titles for those going on to bigger equipment. And you're a great writer. You really have an artistic bent to you, and it shows in both your photography as well as your books. So, have you always been into photography? Has that always kind of been one of your things?
It has been. My dad was an amateur photographer and pretty good. And when I was maybe 11, 12 years old, my dad said, I asked my dad if I could get a good camera. I was using a little box camera. And he said, I'm going to bring home a book for you to read about photography. And when you're done reading it, I'm going to give you a quiz. And if you pass the quiz, I'll buy you a camera. So he brought this book home with all that, the f-stops and shutter speeds and all those things on film cameras and digital too. And one night over dinner, I told him I was ready, and in front of the assembled multitudes of my family, he quizzed me on it, and I passed. So I got a little Voigtlander camera, 35 millimeter, way back. So yeah, I've always been involved in it. And then I've been fortunate in my flying carpet column that I had with Flight Training Magazine till very recently. I was able to use photography there in the course of all kinds of flying adventures. And then ultimately we've ended up printing some, and it's been a real fun addition to remember my trips by.
Well, you've got a real talent for it, and it's great for us because we get to share some of it today. Why don't we take some of your images and take a look at them, and you give us a little bit of narrative. What do you say?
Sounds great. Let me start with some general comments first. I am not a professional aerial photographer. And the reason I say that is people like Mike Collins and Jim Kepnick and Mike Pfizer, who shoot for the magazines, these are people who pick the perfect day. They go up, they check, the charts as to which way the sun will be, where the shadows will be at what times. They know where they're going to go shoot. They take off with an airplane where the window or the door has been removed because the best shooting is through open space, without any windows between. And they get marvelous photos. But what I do is really much more like what all of us personal, private, recreational pilots do, which is I take my camera along, I'm on my way somewhere, I see something interesting, and I take the picture. And I take a lot of them, and I throw out a lot of them. But that's one reason why when I did my little poll in my Facebook group, I found out a lot of people wanted some tips on how to do this, and I think I can share some useful things for you, some useful ideas. Before we look at the pictures, I want to make a couple points. you don't want to be playing with your camera or your cell phone during critical phases of flight. I'm sure it's obvious. I mean, short final, down low between hills, there are places that you need to be concentrating on your flying, not on taking pictures. So in those scenarios, if you want to take pictures, you either give the camera to someone else and tell them what you want, or you give them the airplane if they're a pilot and you take the pictures. And my wife Jean and I have done this over the years, and quite a few of the photos that I attribute them to both of us when she's involved, but she's shot a lot of my column photos because I had no business, I needed to fly the plane. So that's one thing I want to say. Another thing I want to mention is it's useful to slow the airplane down if you see something useful, a shot you want to take. So putting on a notch of flaps and slowing it down gives you time. And then here's an important one. Stall spin accidents sometimes arise from aerial photography. You're flying along slowly and you've got one wing up or one wing down, depending on what you're flying. And you're kicking some rudder in order to keep the view ahead or behind the wing or the strut. Get a little slow. You're low, maybe because you're taking pictures. It's very easy to stall or spin the airplane in. So you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're flying slowly, taking pictures with a lot of rudder without being extremely aware of where you are in the flight envelope. So I wanted to say those things first before getting into any photographs. Okay, that being said, this is exactly the photo I wanted to see. Thank you. This is aspens in the inner basin of the San Francisco Peaks, which is near where we live. And I pulled this up. This is one of my my most popular and best-selling photographs I've ever taken. I want to quote a famous photographer named Roland Sherman, who did a lot of the 60s albums and musicians, a really talented photographer, nothing to do with aviation. But I saw a documentary and the interviewer asked Roland what makes for a great photographer. And his answer was flying saucer. If you don't have your camera with you when the flying saucer comes by, you won't get the photo. So this is a great example. We were going to fly some relatives over the Grand Canyon on the way, but it was cloudy over there. We couldn't really get over the canyon. We're on our way back. Sunlight comes through the clouds on these golden autumn aspen trees. Magic, miracle. And I had my camera. Okay, so this is one of the three things I want you to remember from this talk. If you don't have your camera with you when the flying saucer comes by, you won't get the photo. Okay. Next we can take a look at the, exactly. Sometimes you look out the window and you say, wow, that's pretty crazy stuff I'm seeing. And you have to capture it at that moment. This is actually salt ponds off Great Salt Lake. They're removing different minerals from the ponds through evaporation, and there was a high overcast, so we're seeing clouds reflected on the water. So this is another example of, I had my camera, I was aware of what's going on, and I took a photograph. This is one of my personal favorites I've ever taken, because it's just so crazy. And let's go on to the next one, please. These are sand dunes at the south end of Death Valley. And the point I want to make here is, this could be whipped cream on a cappuccino, right? It's very difficult to tell what we're seeing here at a glance, or how big they are. But I got home and I discovered something that really helps with this sort of photo, which is if you have something people can relate to in it. So I changed the title of this from Death Valley Salt Flats to Death Valley Salt Flats with Campers. Do you see the campers? Those are campers at the left side of the photo. They make it, because now you know how big those dunes are. So sometimes having a foreign object in the picture actually helps. Let's go on to the next one, please. This is the edge of the painted desert, not far from where I live. And I had shot a lot of photos of the painted desert, which is just mind-blowing from the air on a clear day. And I shot a photo that was, if you look at the lower right-hand corner with all that red, I had a frame that was filled with that. And I sent it to one of my editors out east and said, hey, I'm thinking of making a big print of this. What do you think? And he said, well, it's pretty neat, but you got carried away with Photoshop. In other words, from Maryland, that red down there is not believable, right? So another trick I've learned is to shoot a little back from a particularly unusual stuff on the ground and include something that the viewer can relate to. So in this case, that green on the plateau on the left, we know that's a good color. We know that's real, and therefore we can accept the crazy mineral leaden colors of the painted desert at the right. Okay. Next image. Here we go. We're going to talk about this one for a little while here. This is Sedona, Arizona. Some of you know I live near there and I get a lot of pictures of it. So this is not a real special photo, but it's kind of a nice one, I think. And it's an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we see out the window versus what we get. So first of all, I've already mentioned the best thing you can do is shoot through open windows. But a lot of us are forced to shoot through the acrylic windows of the airplane. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. Whether you're shooting with a camera or a smartphone, a dedicated camera or a smartphone, you want to identify the least distorted directions from your plane. So like the 182 I fly, I shoot out the side window or I'll shoot just ahead of the door. But if you shoot out the windshield, it's curved, it's distorted, you've got the propeller out there. So if I see something special, it's taken me a while to realize I got to turn the airplane off course and shoot that out the side window. And that's going to be true in most airplanes. The side window is where you're going to be. So you want to have your camera out and ready from takeoff time. It's helpful if you're using a regular camera to set your focus to infinity because otherwise the autofocus sometimes gets confused about whether it's focusing on the window or something outside. Just making sure I'm not missing any key point right here, and I'm not. Okay, so let's go back to this photo, please, that we were just looking at. And now, I see this beautiful view, right? I pull out my camera, I take a photograph out the window. This is going to be neat. I'm going to be able to show all my friends where I live, how gorgeous it is. And then I go home and I look at my image, whether it's taken with a camera, smartphone, or whatever. And we can roll that video right now, please. This is what I see when I get home, right? We've all been there. What's the problem? Why couldn't I capture what I saw? Well, we're looking through this awful filter of acrylic windows, most of us. So what we want to do, notice how blue this picture looks. You can see it on the strut. We can use a white balance tool, which is this little eyedropper here, or you can do this manually on a smartphone by moving toward warm in your little sliders. But we need to get the blue out of this. So in this case, you see by grabbing a white from some other point in the photo, we're telling the whole image what real white is and is correcting the colors. But it's still pretty dull, right? Because the plastic windows desaturate the photo and they also reduce the contrast. So this is still not very special. So now we're going to do something about that. We're going to increase the contrast a little, which you can do with a slider on your smartphone, or you can do it in other, using any variety of a slider in Lightroom or an auto contrast setting. so that we start to get some better differentiation between dark and light. Now, the color correction that I showed you a moment ago, that's point 2 that you want to remember. That's the thing that most people don't do, and it solves a whole lot of problems. You see here, as we increase the contrast here, this is starting to look pretty good, isn't it? And we also need to increase the saturation of the colors. And here I'm using a slider, and you can see I've gone crazy just to show you what saturation means. It's how deep and how bright the colors are. This is a slider on your smartphone. It's something you can do in Photoshop or in Lightroom or in any number of different applications. So that combination of things takes that miserable photo. I'm going to take the strut out of here, and we're going to look at it a little more. Takes the blue out of the photo and brings back in the contrast and the color, and we get rid of that blue. Now, is this legit? We all hear the term photoshopping as applied to things, you know, turning something real into something that's not real. Yes, this is legit. Contrary to what you might think, the camera is not totally objective. It does not capture always what the eye sees. When we're flying in the airplane, we see this. Our eyes correct, our heads, our minds correct for the blue cast and the desaturation. We can see it. So, item 3 to remember from this talk, from Adriel Heisey, National Geographic photographer. When you take a photograph out the window, take a mental photograph at the same time. And remember what was special about the scene. Because your job, if you're going to do post-processing later, and you'll have to if you're shooting out a plastic window, your job is to impart to the photo what you saw. You're trying to show what you saw, not how the camera got fooled by the plastic window. So those are the key points I want to make to you. 1, always have your camera with you, and have it out and ready. And 2, not a bad idea to shoot in raw files if you're using a regular camera. So, because you're going to need to do post-processing to get a good image. But regardless of whether you're using, how you're doing this, you need to correct the blue out by moving toward warm with the colors, and then increase the saturation and the contrast. And sometimes structure or detail is another slider that's helpful. And then finally, take a photo with your head at the same time you take one with the camera. So when you go home and you want to show everybody this amazing sight you saw, you can adjust your photo to reflect that and show it off. Okay, if anybody has questions.
Wonderful job, Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that we've had a lot of people in the chat box giving you thumbs up and telling you what beautiful work you do. Emily, Tom, Rob, Jeff, Mary, Nick, all of these people, Jed, they all really appreciate your work, and we do too. Learned a few things about Lightroom too as well. Well,
I'll mention if anybody wants. Go ahead, excuse me. I was just going to say this.
No, you go.
Okay, my website, which is gregbrownflyingcarpet.com, and you can add /photos if you want, but I've got a lot of aerial photos there that if you want to see some of the work I've done, and very often it's connected to a column, so you can hear the story behind the photo. So that was all I wanted to mention. If you enjoy them, go on over and have a look.
Yeah,
Russ?
That's good information. And I really like the thing you said about UFO. I can't tell you how many times there was something going on. I like to take pictures of clouds. I'm a kind of a cloud nut, so I've got a whole directory on my computer full of nothing but cloud shots. But there'll be a beautiful, some cloud display. I'll run in back to the studio and grab a camera, and by the time I get it working and go out, it's changed, it's gone, the UFO disappeared. So that's a great metaphor. Greg, why don't we give away another cap and t-shirt? Does that seem okay to you?
Absolutely.
Okay, here's how we're going to do this. We are going to, once again, we're going to put an image up here. This is going to be one, and we won't put it up there quite yet. This is going to be one where you have to name what type of airplane it is, the make and model. I made one too easy yesterday. I said, okay, just first person to type, the first people to type in the word airplane win the t-shirt. And the guys in the booth just told me the chat boxes and comments just lit up with streaming airplane words. So this one's, you're going to have to really know it. Everybody's not going to get it, but somebody will, and that person will get a t-shirt and a cap. So here is the airplane picture. First person to type in what type of airplane it is wins the prize. And it's a beautiful airplane, by the way. The owner is a friend of mine. I have not flown it, although I have flown in it. And as tail draggers go with that big engine over the front, you've got absolutely no visibility. So that's a handful of airplane to fly. Actually was kind of lost out to Beach Bonanza when they first came out with trying to come out with a sort of a business aircraft. So we're waiting for someone to tell us what kind of airplane that is. At some point, one of the guys in the control room, oh, I see him flying by now. Yeah, there we are. So they are just going to tell me, looking across all three platforms, our live page, as well as Facebook and YouTube, which one got it there first. So in just a moment, I will announce the happy winner. We do have a winner. Okay, who is it? Jason. Okay, Jason, you are on the onlinegroundschool.com/live chat. So you won this, Jason. We did have, so I want you to write down this email address. It's prize, P-R-I-Z-E, at onlinegroundschool.com. Give us your size and your snail mail address. We did have, it was either yesterday or maybe it was the day before, we had, oh, the correct answer, of course, yeah, thank you. It's a Cessna 195, beautiful airplane, absolutely gorgeous airplane. Cessna 195, I think that has a Jacobson engine in it, but I'm not positive about that. We had 2 days ago, somebody was Mark, the winner was Mark, and all we had was the first name, and then we had 3 guys with the name Mark write in and say, hey, I won, so give it to me. So Jason, you're the one who was in the Online Ground School/live. Send us that email to prize@onlinegroundschool.com. and we will send you a safe cap and a Gold Seal t-shirt. Okay, we are just about ready to wrap it up for the day. Let's see how the time looks. Oh, this is perfect. This was right at an hour, and that's a great time. We got to let people get out and do other things. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. Dave, I want to thank you, and thanks to our friends Rod and Greg for joining us, and another one of these live broadcasts. We've been doing them for some time, but this is the first time we've tackled 5 in a row. And there's just no way I could pull this off without the dedicated group of folks at Gold Seal. Jeff Jorgensen has called them my team of magicians, and I fully agree. They are true magicians, and Gold Seal couldn't be the great resource that it is without every single one of them. So my special thank you to Osmo, Ethan, Flash Gordon, Rich, John, and Nate. You guys are the true superstars. Thank you. All right, join us tomorrow, Friday, for another broadcast. Same time, same channel. After all, you're the reason we're here. Thank you for being a part of the Gold Seal community. We will see you tomorrow. Hit us up on Facebook and visit us, easy for me to say, at groundschool.com. And let's all join together to keep the spirit of general aviation alive. Fly smart and show everyone that you're a Gold Seal pilot. So long.
This webinar is brought to you by SAFE and the Gold Seal Online Ground School, where instructors join for free. Visit Gold Seal at onlinegroundschool.com.